Hello and welcome to the Point Blank Show. My name is Abhishek. Our guest today is Clive Oppenheimer, Professor of Volcanology at the University of Cambridge. He's also a filmmaker and has made 2 documentary features, one called Into the Inferno and Fireball, Visitors from Darker Worlds. His most recent book, Mountains of Fire, The Secret Lives of Volcanoes, takes us into the mysterious world of these fiery giants. The Economist says his book is, quote, a love letter to volcanoes and an investigation into all the ways that they have and continue to sustain humanity, both spiritually and scientifically, unquote. His tome also brings us amusing and amazing stories from his adventures over many decades. Thank you, Clive, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank you. I read in your book, and it's right at the beginning, that as a volcanologist, I have dedicated my career to observing simmering craters, often at very close quarters, with a view to revealing their secrets. Elsewhere, you write, you've been at the crater's edge, peering with assorted monitoring devices or hunting far-flung deposits of Earth's greatest eruptions. All of this is not exactly the regular day in the life of a regular corporate worker. How did your mum react the day you told her, this is what I want to do?
I think she asked, couldn't I be a botanist instead? Or something along those lines. She might not have been too surprised because I fell in love with geology maybe at around the age of 10, visiting the Geological Museum in London. And I was just captivated by the fabulous gemstones, opals and gold nuggets. So geology started early. I studied at university, and before I went up to university, I had a gap year and traveled in Indonesia and saw a lot of volcanoes fairly close up. So I think something was brewing there that led me in that direction ultimately.
Yeah, because you're supposed to run away from them and not towards them is what folks might, imagine. And I think there was Robert Capa, the great photographer, I think he once said, right, if your pictures are not good enough, you are not close enough. I'm wondering that for you, your job requires you to go to the site. You can't really sit away unless it's a COVID-like situation where you may have to do remote analysis. But you really do have to be there. To just take us the day in the life on the field. How is it, Clive? If you could explain to a lay person, what does a volcanologist do when on the field and when not, when off it?
Well, I could even start by just telling you my trajectory. My PhD was actually sitting in an office like this, looking at satellite images of volcanoes. And in particular, could we measure their temperatures from space in infrared images? So I do have a number of colleagues who don't have to do fieldwork. We can study volcanoes remotely. But I think after my PhD, I did quite a bit of what they call ground truthing, where I went into the field to measure temperatures that I could then compare with the satellite images. And that I think demonstrated to me that I wanted to be quite strongly field-based as a volcanologist going forwards. What's it like? I go to a volcano with not very firm plans other than that I want to come home with the best data that I can. In the time available. And that means, what is the volcano doing? What is the weather doing? What's safe? What's unsafe? Because I don't want to get too close. I don't want to sacrifice myself just to collect some observations. And then I would either be camped on the mountain or staying in a hotel, make my way to the crater, get the equipment out, set it up. I worked with an infrared instrument to measure the gases coming out of the volcano. That would sit on a tripod. Data would be recording on a laptop, other devices, thermal images, and so on. And I would collect data for the best part of a day, come back, and that would go on for a number of days. That's like the tip of the iceberg. Then the big work is back in the university, is processing all of those data. So a lot of number crunching, plotting this against that to see if any patterns emerge.
You said you can get as close to a volcano as possible without risking your life, but things oftentimes may not go according to the plan. You describe in your book vividly of times when you've been in situations where your mum, you would have really loved for you to be a botanist. Can you describe one or two such situations? The reason why I ask you is not to glamorize this so much as we in the corporate world sometimes talk about pressure. But that is nowhere compared to the physical and mental grind when you don't have anybody around you to help but yourself, and you have to think on your feet to get out of there, or to make sure you're out there not collecting data but to be in one piece. Let's talk about that primal, instincts that kick in. Can you describe a couple of situations where you saw yourself being, oh my God, this is bad?
Well, one primal instinct that kicks in is actually needing to vacate your bowels very suddenly when there's a loud explosion and lava bombs flying towards you. That happened to me actually. My very first bit of fieldwork as a PhD student in Italy on Stromboli volcano. I was up at the summit. I had a little thermal camera to measure temperatures of the lava bubbling away in the vent. But every 20 minutes or so, the magma would explode out very violently with a very loud detonation, a lot of gas streaming out. And then over the next seconds, you would see these projectiles coming out over the rim of the crater, and some landed really just a few paces away from me. So that was a very steep learning curve for me, realizing, and I was on my own for part of this work, realizing that this was extremely hazardous, and that the data I was collecting were not going to be worth sacrificing myself for.
And I've read that in outer space, when you have these debris, even a small debris the size of a small speck of dust can injure a satellite or a spaceship. Now, on the ground near a volcano, these lava fragments, how dangerous can they be? Can they pierce your body? How does that piece work?
Well, let me just reach over here on my mantelpiece. I mean, imagine if that hit you on the head, even with a helmet, it's not going to do you much good. I would say that the hard hat is good up to the size of about a walnut, maybe. It'll give you some protection.
Right.
Above that, you just don't want to be there when in that kind of a scenario. So, and that was the thrust of my PhD, was can we measure volcanoes and observe them from space without having to put ourselves in harm's way? And some of the spectroscopic techniques I've used, I don't need to go up to the gas vent to sample it. I can observe it from several hundred meters away with the telescope of this spectrometer and collect data somewhat remotely.
And has the technology to collect this data improved? I stumbled into a paper that you had done back in 1991. Avarice is what was used, which is basically what I read was an airborne infrared imaging spectrometer. What I understood was, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is apparently it was flown over Mount Etna and Stromboli, and the idea was to capture thermal data from lava-filled vents. And the idea was to study whether these imaging spectrometers could help monitor the volcanic temperatures there. Would that be right? And have things improved since 91 when you started out and today? And what kind of world do we live in when it comes to technology to getting these devices? And forgive me, I don't understand this world.
No, it's not, as you say, it's not the sort of routine thing that everybody does to peer at volcanoes from space. So Avarice was an imaging spectrometer that was on an aircraft, but really was a prototype for instruments that are up in space now on satellites. And the difference between an aircraft and a satellite, of course, is the satellite is going around in orbit all the time, and you can collect data, whereas using an aircraft, it's a special mission, it's very expensive. So yes, I mean, there are now many operational satellites not dedicated to studying volcanoes, but the volcanologist, we use the data. We can measure the changing shape of a volcano from space. We can measure the gas emissions, particularly from larger eruptions into the atmosphere. So certainly the satellite remote sensing has developed. I have colleagues working with drones that fly sensors into the volcanic cloud, collecting samples, making measurements. Again, that's a safer way of obtaining data than going there with a backpack and the hard hat, hoping nothing large hits you. So certainly the field side, things have developed. But I think what's also interesting is on the lab side, now we're using very, very sophisticated laboratory equipment to study the most minute part imaginable of a rock sample and trying to understand from that the deep processes going on beneath a volcano in the magma reservoir that might fuel an eruption. So both on the lab side, the computational side, machine learning, we're always trying to see what technology can do to help us understand volcanoes and monitor them.
And what is it that you want to find out? When you say understand volcanoes, there is a beautiful section at the beginning in your book where you compare volcanoes to our parents who've been there before us. And you also say that they are at crossroads of nature, spirit, climate, geology, technology, society, and culture, which is so. Can you please decode that for us?
Yes, I mean, as a volcanologist, my training is in the natural sciences. I studied physics and chemistry and geology, but there are many disciplines that my work interfaces with. So, for example, yes, we can collect the rocks, study them in the lab. We can monitor the volcanoes with the most sophisticated seismometers and other devices. If we want to use that information to protect the communities that are threatened by volcanoes, then the science is not enough. We also need to understand how to communicate effectively, how to build trust in those communities so that they understand what it is science can do and also what it can't do. I've worked with archaeologists studying, I don't know if I've got here, I've got one here. This wasn't planned, they're just rocks all over my office. This is a little piece of obsidian. It's a volcanic glass, and that's been shaped in Neolithic times into quite a sharp knife. Probably not quite sharp enough to shave with, but a very effective knife. This was a very prized commodity in the Stone Age, and working with archaeologists, we've been able to measure the chemistry of these tools and then link it to which volcano, which outcrop on the volcano, which lava flow that actually came from. And now we know that somebody collected it there, and other people brought it to this point where it's found by archaeologists. I've worked with historians and chemists, so that's why I say volcanology is a kind of melting pot, because it does interface with the arts and culture, with the humanities, with the social sciences, as well as the natural sciences.
Melting pot. That's a nice pun as well.
Unintended.
You also quote Japanese chemist Sadao Matsuo, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and you say that he described volcanoes as a telegram from the Earth's interior. How did he mean that, and why is that so important?
I think it was based on a Japanese proverb, something along the lines of snow being a message from the sky, something like this. It's very beautiful, and the gases that come out of the earth, they tell us about their provenance. So let's say, a fraction, 5 or 10% of the molten rock that might lie beneath a volcano is made up of volatile elements: water, carbon dioxide, sulfur, chlorine, fluorine. And those volatile elements, they want to be gases. And if they can, they'll then form bubbles and they might escape. They might escape to the surface, even from magma that's many, many kilometers below the summit of the volcano. So that's what we mean by messengers. These gases are leaking out, and we can measure their chemistry. We can measure the changes in chemistry over time. And maybe if we understand something about how the volcano works, maybe we can decode those messages to figure out what the volcano might be thinking of doing in the next 6 months, 12 months, 12 years.
Right. And do they tell us something about, you said what will they do in the future, but what does the past, that is the volcanoes, tell us about the planet's past? Does it in the first place? I had a chance to speak with Dr. Marcia Bunerud. She is a geologist and she's written a book called Turning to Stone, where she talks about how if you listen closely, then stones tell us something about the planet's past. Do volcanoes also have that reputation, and if so, how?
Oh, they absolutely do, because the rocks that are produced by volcanoes are often preserved. So we can go, for example, in southern India, there's a great deal of basalt lava erupted 66 million years ago, so-called Deccan traps. We can see these now exposed at the surface. Of course, they're very ancient rocks now, but we can study them and we can work out how much lava was erupted. This was a very extremely intense episode of volcanism, maybe lasting tens or hundreds of thousands of years, pouring phenomenal quantities of gases into the atmosphere, almost certainly changing the climate. And it coincides with the demise of the dinosaurs, the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous. So studying volcanoes absolutely tells us a great deal about Earth history. If we come closer to our own time, maybe we go to Tanzania and we see the footprints of Australopithecus afarensis preserved in the ash in Olduvai. So volcanoes, they have a way of preserving as well what's going on in the environment. They have many stories to tell us.
When did you go back, if you can, to your childhood, Clive? When was the first time you thought, wow, this is magical and this is what I want to be doing for the rest of my life?
Yeah, I think I would say that the geology began in that geological museum, and I think that the wow was just the aesthetic qualities of these stones. I mean, this is the big museum in London. They're not little things I could find on the marketplace. They're the best quality, huge amethyst geodes and meteorites and so on. So I think I just found these extraordinary, outer worldly in some ways, but clearly of our world, except for the meteorites. And there was also in that museum a model of Mount Etna in Sicily, and it would light up with simulation of a lava flow coming down the side. So I'm sure that sowed a seed. And then I think traveling in Indonesia in my gap year, seeing volcanoes up close, climbing up 3,000 meters up Mount Merapi, for example, into attenuated air, seeing these spectacular views, seeing into the crater. There's something about a volcano that, unlike another kind of mountain, you get a better view when you climb a mountain. With a volcano, there's something you can only ever see if you get to the top of the crater. Otherwise, it's hidden from view. And you don't know what's in that crater till you get up there. Is it hissing and fizzing and steaming away? Is it silent? And of course, somewhere like Indonesia, these volcanoes are home to temples, and ancient temples, modern practices of rituals of presenting offerings to the spirits that dwell within the volcano. So they're very much part of a living culture of humanity, as well as being a geological phenomenon.
You also mentioned somewhere that some folks had planted a cross near one. Was it to dispel bad omens? I forget. What was that? Was it that it has a bad rep? Hollywood makes volcanoes look very deadly and quite destructive, and that bit doesn't help. But what happened there? So having a cross next to a volcano.
Yes, I think Hollywood, I mean, there are quite a few volcano disaster movies, and the dog usually makes it out, so that's the good news. And I think in a similar way, the news media, when we hear about a volcano, it's a catastrophe, or it's stopped aviation. We don't hear about the volcano in the centuries or millennia, when they're tranquil places and the communities live with and love their environment. And so I think that's something that's always interested me. When lava has been advancing out of volcanoes and heading towards populated areas or towards agricultural land or pasture, I think it's quite a common practice around the world for the shamans and for the priests to come out with the cross or with a goat or with a child, perhaps. I don't think that's done anymore, but rituals are performed to propitiate the gods or to try and protect the community. So I think that's a very interesting. Humans have tried to control those subterranean forces.
And you talked about flights being affected. There was one very famous British Airways, was it, when it flew over the Icelandic ash in 1982?
At Java.
At Java, oh right, and all four
Yeah,
engines had
Java.
stopped. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, Captain Moody was on the deck. I think he'd just been for a pee in the back and came on the flight deck, and the glass was aglow with this St. Elmo's fire. And one by one, they lost the engines. They're losing height, of course, now. They're going through the manuals, trying to find the manuals, what the procedures.
Yeah.
The captain comes on and says, "You may have noticed we're having a spot of bother here, but, rest assured we're doing our damnedest to get this right, and we'll get back to you with more information." And he takes the risk of coming down at a steeper angle than I think he needed to get into thicker air and eventually manage to restart one, and then I think ultimately maybe all the engines, and to land in Jakarta. But the window had been so crazed by flying into this ash over Mount Galunggung that the pilots couldn't see out the front. So I think one of them was peering out to the side and saying left a bit, right a bit, trying to line up with the runway lights.
Amazing.
It was a safe landing, and of course, Captain Moody lived on that story for the rest of his life.
Yes, and I think that was a masterpiece in understatement. You said a spot of bother, and it's something to do with, I think, folks who are born in the UK who are good at this in terms of humor or keeping it understated. I think he said, if I remember correctly, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've lost all 4 engines and we are doing our damnedest to get them all going. I hope you're not too distressed, or some such. And when I read it for the first time many years ago, I said, wow, I would be panicking. And here he is, obviously. That's why I'm not a pilot. But yeah, that volcanic ash gave that story, and Captain Moody, he's been living proof that you can get around it. And also, getting to the volcano itself can be quite a daunting task, is what I learned, in that it's not you just pick up your bag and walk and then that's it, the trek begins. You were at one point... how was it to be on the working end of a Soviet-made Cuban AK-47 assault rifle, to quote Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men? You also had to do that, didn't you?
Yes, I suppose, to quote Captain Moody, perhaps I could say, well, it was an uncomfortable situation, but I had a sandwich and everything was fine afterwards. Yes, no, I've worked a fair bit in Ethiopia and in the Danakil region of Ethiopia, which is very sparsely populated by the Afar, many of whom carry a gun, and it's I would say sort of fairly lawless region. It's very hot, very inhospitable, and I think there's a kind of cultural xenophobia there, which is understandable, because when outsiders have come in, it's usually been to take something, to take a bit of land where there's more water, or to take the salt, or to take the minerals. So they become very interested when a group of geologists turns up with water and food and medicine and vehicles. Typically there is some kind of interaction that's quite hostile, but probably quite normal, because if you read the accounts going back from the 19th century, the first Europeans who crossed the Danakil, they had very similar experiences. They're quizzed, what are you doing here? And yes, fine, go up the volcano. Will have eaten and drunk all your food by the time you get back. So I think probably if I lived there, I would maybe have the same attitude, actually, if somebody showed up.
And then you got through that. You had to sleep through the night with people walking around you with those kinds of rifles, and anything could have happened. And again, I mean, these are perils. This is an occupational hazard for you, because you're going to these places. In Libya, you write about snake bites and heat strokes and whatnot that you may have to face. Kidnapping or vehicle breakdowns is what you write. So that's quite a horror show if you are on the field and you get into any of these tangles.
Yes, I mean, potentially it can be, things could have turned out differently. I think in general, I would say I've been with the right people. I've been with local collaborators who have calmed difficult situations down, explained what we're up to. And I mean, things like snakes, this is, if you're out in the wilderness, certain parts of the world, then of course there might be some critters also out to get you. So yeah, you need to be on your toes. It's not just the volcano and its action. Yeah. But the thing I'm most terrified about is transportation, just driving on roads where there's very little regard for the sort of norms of driving, or in helicopters. These are means of transport that can also be hazardous. More hazardous.
Yeah, because you're the man who walked down a volcano almost blind, didn't you? Your batteries ran out on the torch that you had, and then you walked down. Driving is more dangerous for a man who can walk down blind with a volcano behind him.
Well, the good news was that I walked in the right direction. I wasn't confident, but it turned out I'd gone in the right. When you go up to a volcano and your torch fails, going up is easy. You just go up until you reach the top. But going down, of course, you could go in many different directions. I followed my instincts on that one, and it turned out okay.
Lovely. And what are the kind of, over the years, over 3 decades, in terms of discoveries that you made, that you rank really high up there from your own experience, which challenged conventional wisdom and now is being taken as a base for further studies? Some things that you think are, wow, this is my contribution and I love it.
Well, I think the things I love actually are having had the privilege of being an educator and having worked with many early career researchers and PhD students, because they become friends, they become colleagues, and seeing them flourish in their careers is hugely rewarding. I think of the collaborations as well with colleagues around the world. If you work on volcanoes, often you're working with colleagues in volcano observatories who really have that 24/7 operational role with an active volcano, looking at it round the clock and protecting their community. So that's also a great privilege. I mean, of the research things, I mean, one thing we did more than 20 years ago now, we found these little devices on the market. It's a little ultraviolet spectrometer. As you can see, it's pretty small, but that replaced a technology that was from the 60s and 70s, a very large instrument. You can actually see it in Dante's Peak with Pierce Brosnan. He operates it from the helicopter, the old correlation spectrometer or COSPEC. We found we could make equally good measurements with these. We built them into autonomous units with scanners on, and that's now the standard technology used by volcanoes around the world. So having played a role in that development, that gives me some sense of pride. I think the other thing, Matt, perhaps is I've become very interested in cycles, the rhythms of volcanoes, and some observations that we made at Mount Erebus in Antarctica really have stayed with me now for 20 years. And these were observations made with a spectrometer that revealed a 10-minute cycle in the gas composition. It would become more carbon dioxide rich and then more water rich. This rhythm, and I really, I was so surprised when I saw this. I thought it had to be an artifact of my processing. I'd done something wrong. It's really there. We've seen it in everything, and now we know actually the lava. We built a radar device to measure the lake level, and we saw it going up and down by a meter or two every 10 minutes. It's great to, I'm really excited that we could reveal with close observations, we revealed something that people going up there had never observed in 20 or 30 years. The measurements revealed it. And that's, I guess, still fuels my work today, is to understand why does it have this? Why is the volcano breathing? And why is it a 10-minute breath, not a 30-minute breath or a 1-minute breath? These are very fundamental questions, actually, that if we can answer them, we're really learning something about how volcanoes work.
And another one that you answered, Clive, and please correct me here, is something around Homo sapiens, or how old the Homo sapiens fossils were, which came from, was it Ethiopia, which some people thought they were some 30,000 years older than one had thought before you guys discovered something. What was that about?
Yeah, so this is, I mentioned how we can take these obsidian, this glassy rock, and chemically fingerprint it and find its match on the volcano. We can do the same with ash. We can take the glassy part of ash that might be 1,000 kilometers away from the volcano that produced it, or even further, 10,000 kilometers away. If we get a good chemical fingerprint, we can match it to that deposit, a particular deposit on the volcano. So in the case of Homo sapiens, this was work led by my colleague Céline Marie Vidal here in Cambridge. And the fossils, these are the fossils, Omo fossils from Ethiopia, which had been dated to around 195,000 years. The fossils are not dated. The way most of the hominins fossils have been dated is by dating the ash layers above or below. And then if it's below, then the fossil is older than that ash. If it's above, it's younger. And what Céline Marie was able to do was to take an ash that was above the fossils. It's very difficult to date the ash if it's just glass. but she could match that glass to the volcano, which is in the Ethiopian Rift. And then it's possible to date the deposits from the volcano itself because they've got bigger crystals in. You can take them to the lab and date them. And that came up with this age of around 230,000 years. And the fossils are older than that because they're beneath the ash. So it was finding a new minimum age for those fossils which still stand as the oldest undisputed Homo sapiens fossils.
Wow. And how do you celebrate such successes with your colleagues and team members? When you crack something, how do you go out? Do you get drunk? Do volcanologists enjoy getting their hair down? And how do you celebrate?
Well, each to their own, I guess. In this case, we did that work was published in the journal Nature. And when Céline Marie had the letter from the editor saying that the paper would be accepted, it's a big deal to get something into Nature. So she was understandably overjoyed, and we did go and have a little celebration in one of the pubs in Cambridge. I don't think anyone got drunk. I think most of us are teetotal, but we certainly had we marked the occasion, and I think that moment was for Céline Marie was probably as good as finding this geochemical match to the rocks. That was the thing that really made it possible.
And all of this requires a lot of reading, researching as well. Your book has examples from, you read something in the Times of London back in 1861. There are manuscripts that you quote from some text. And I'm reading this out, forgive me, is that you came across a text in Poetic Edda, also known as the Codex Regius, Iceland's most important medieval manuscript. Wow. What are the places that this book has taken you, and what kind of reading does your profession entail, just to keep up or to go into rabbit holes to find something that is relevant to what you're looking for?
It's certainly reading. It's also working with the right collaborators, the right colleagues who have expertise. If I read that medieval manuscript in a translation, I would misinterpret it. I would misunderstand it. So it's really important to work with the experts who know those sources, know the poetry and the vernacular of a period of a distant age. So I think certainly the collaboration is very important. But it's also, it's fascinating just going out of your comfort zone, going into the anthropological literature, certainly reading works of history. On the monks, the monks were an observant bunch of people. They would, in their secluded communities, observe the world around them. And it would be very significant to them, for example, if there were a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, or the sun was unusually dimmed or reddened. They would note this in the annals, in the chronicles. One of the pieces of work we did recently, I was involved with this, really tickles me. It was concerned lunar eclipses. So we know when lunar eclipses happen back through time. Astronomers can calculate exactly this time, this day, it would have been visible from this part of the Earth. So armed with that, my colleague Seb Guillet in Geneva looked at the medieval records between 1100 and 1300 CE. And nearly all of those eclipses had been recorded. You'd think maybe it would be cloudy.
Yeah.
But if you look around the sources, there was usually some clear skies, and these were noted. They would also note the coloration of the moon when it's in a full eclipse. Normally, it doesn't go completely dark because there's some light that's refracted around the Earth, and you see a reddish surface to the moon. But sometimes the moon would almost disappear, and the monks would write this. It was almost completely dark, and the reason for that is volcanic dust in the stratosphere, which of course they knew nothing about. But very, very large eruptions anywhere on the planet can generate dust in the stratosphere that then is dispersed around the hemisphere or around both hemispheres. And that's blocking out some of the light, and the moon appeared dark. So we've looked at those accounts, and now we have a better idea of the dates of these eruptions. These are not eruptions that we have written records for. They may be in Indonesia or Central America or other parts of the world. We don't know. But I find it fabulous that nearly a millennium on, we're going back to the monks' records and understanding more about distant volcanic eruptions.
Amazing. And does it also help us? It's very hard to predict earthquakes. Now that you talked about going back to millennia and seeing these documented, but can a village which is living close to a volcano be warned in advance for them to evacuate? And how often does that happen? Do we have technology to make that happen? Although from what I've learned is it's very difficult to do that with earthquakes. I'm not sure how is it with volcanoes?
Yeah, it's easier with volcanoes because the eruption happens when the molten rock has reached the surface, and it starts its journey quite a long way down. So in that passage from maybe 5 or 10 kilometers down up to the surface, it's got to move the rocks apart to get up there. That's going to generate earthquakes that we can detect. It's going to lift up the ground. We can measure that from space. We can measure it with very precise GPS. Gases might leak out in advance. We can measure all of that. So if we have the observations underway, then it is possible to see the signs of a volcano that's reawakening and even its progression, perhaps towards an eruption. That doesn't mean it's not challenging. It's exceedingly challenging because often a volcano will come to life deep down. There'll be some movements. Maybe the magma will move a little bit, but then it will stall in the crust. It will freeze there. It won't make its way to the surface. And that's very difficult for us, is to discriminate what are the maybe 10% of cases where that kind of unrest is going to culminate in an eruption. So we do have a lot of uncertainty in the forecasts. If you go to Iceland, they're doing a fantastic job there. That area that's seen a lot of eruptions in the last 4 years or so is absolutely bristling with sensors, and so they can see when a new episode is building up and give some warning, even localizing where the magma might come out at the surface.
Do you think these things should be taught at school as well, given the fascinating subject that it is? Because we had, for instance, I had this in geography. We didn't have geology as a separate subject in school. We had history, geography, civics. So there used to be a chapter around volcanoes, and we said, active volcanoes, dormant volcanoes, what are the different kinds? 2 marks answers, so not a lot. How much do you think students should learn, because it tells a lot about our past?
I think what I would do, if I could, it would be to try and help young people, children, understand that these subjects that we call geography and history and literature and physics are not completely separate things. They're not. I think what's interesting is actually how all of these subjects influence each other. So, even art and literature influence science, and science influences art and literature. So I think I would look not to say, let's go really deep into volcanoes, but more, think about the history of knowledge of, go back 200 years or 500 years, what was going on, 1,000 years, how have we got to where we are today through our thinking of trying to understand the environment, the world around us, the meaning of life, the meaning of things. That's what I would try and do. Have a little bit more of a holistic, interdisciplinary perspective on these different subjects that we're taught at school, because they're taught like silos, like separate things, and they're not really.
Yeah, and even climate change, for example, which is now seeping into schools. They are being told at least that this threat is real, and that the generation that they are in need to have more responsibility, or also nudge their parents to get their act together, because it's finally our follies will be borne by the generations to come. Volcanoes and climate change, is there a very strong relationship? What does one tell about the other?
Yes, volcanoes are, if we go to the pre-industrial times, volcanoes are probably the major influence on short-term climate variation. And this, again, it comes back to typically large explosive eruptions that put a lot, particularly of sulfur gases, into the stratosphere. So it's not so much the ash, it's the sulfur gases which then oxidize, and they make tiny, tiny particles that we call sulfate aerosol. And these are so small that they stay in the stratosphere, just very, very gently settling out. And there isn't any rain up there to wash them out. And the particles are really just the right size to have quite a strong effect on incoming sunlight. So they scatter it in more directions. The sky is a bit whiter because of this diffuse light, and there's less solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface because some is being reflected back towards space. So there's a cooling effect. And it's particularly noticeable in the continental regions of the Northern Hemisphere. So North America and Eurasia is where both models and observations, and if we go back in time, things like tree rings show us this cooling in the summertime after some of these very big eruptions. So that's something that's, I think, quite clear. And what's interesting then is, well, okay, an eruption in Indonesia that cools the summer in Europe, well, that might have an impact on agriculture and crops. Grain prices might increase. Poor people will struggle to feed themselves, to get nutrition. If you're malnourished, you're more susceptible to disease. Maybe you're more susceptible to protest because you're hungry. Maybe you migrate. So there is a link, I think, from some of these very large volcanic eruptions through to quite significant demographic changes that also reflect the state of society, politics, economics, culture, and so on. So that's super interesting. Going forwards, one of the ideas to combat global warming is basically to simulate a large eruption and put dust into the stratosphere, let it spread around the globe and shield it a little bit from incoming sunlight. That will have a cooling effect. But one of the counter arguments is that when you have this cooling after large volcanic eruptions, then it can also suppress, to some extent, global rainfall, global precipitation. And particularly, it could affect rainfall in very important grain baskets of the world. For example, the monsoon system in Southeast and Southeast Asia could be affected. There are a lot of scientists looking at these kind of geoengineering projects, and some of them are looking at, well, we have a natural analogue, the volcano, that maybe helps us understand the desirability of this proposal.
All of this requires a whole lot of, I'm assuming, connecting the dots to see a butterfly, that big thing, that butterfly, what is that? Fluttering its wings in Mexico, causing some thunderstorm else, some other place altogether, but although everything is related. And I would imagine there's a lot of mental faculties go in, Clive, but also you need to be physically fit to be able to do certain things that you do, where you have to be on the field. Last couple of questions. What do you do to keep yourself fit in that sense, to be able to withstand some of the physical demands of the job?
Almost nothing. I mean, I occasionally cycle to work. I don't find a lot of time actually to have any fitness regime. I get fit when I'm in the field. So I'm going to slog it out for the first week and suffer. Other than that, I would just say my vegetarian diet, I think, probably primes me for I'm fairly well fueled to get myself up the mountain on my plants.
Lovely. And a last one. We started with a little reference to your mum. I wanted to ask you a couple of lessons that you learned from your parents growing up that have still stayed until this date, and anything that you would like to share.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, my mother brought me up from the age of 8, and I think she, one of the things she always encouraged me to see the world, to travel, to explore, and she never held me back. So I'm sure she was having kittens, the proverbial kittens, while when I set off at 18. I travelled in Sri Lanka and then India, and I made my way to Indonesia, and I'm climbing volcanoes. I'm sending the occasional letters home, and she encouraged me to do that. She never said, don't do that, it's a bit risky." She let me go out and make my own discoveries and make my own mistakes and try and learn from them. So I think that's one thing. And she left school at 14. So she, I think, had she had a couple of things: great love of music, which she imparted to me, and I think a great respect for the value of education. So she was very proud to see me studying and learning, and in fact she got her degree just a year before me, so she learnt very late in life.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, that sort of value of learning, of reading, exploring, all of that sense of wonder, I think I got from my mother.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you, Clive, for sharing that personal bit as well. And thank you very much for your time on the podcast, Clive. This was really fun.
Thank you so much. Real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. And that's Mountains of Fire. For those who are interested, go check it out. The Secret Lives of Volcanoes. It is, Clive, written in a way, like we started talking before recording, it's written in a way that people like me who have absolutely no link to a volcano, and people who are like me who are not remotely qualified to talk about it still can get it. So I think it's written in that manner, which is fun, and you've got, I think, before I let you go, this use of humor as well. I mean, it's little bits. You write someplace that my visit to Ingano, am I pronouncing it right? Where during a 6-week tour of Ethiopia came about thanks to a window of opportunity, bracket also known as unemployment, in 1993. So it is, the writing style is also very friendly, and it has those facts, and it's filled with notes. I think there are about 100 pages of references for people who want to dig in.
That's where the good stuff is buried. It's in the notes.
Yes, no, there you go. An example of that again. Thank you, Clive, yet again. It was fun. This was fun.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.